Welcome to LNN Spotlight, a podcast by the Latino News Network. LNN is dedicated to best serving Hispanic Latinos with local multimedia news and information websites across the U.S., a statewide community-focused initiative. LNN Spotlight is a public affairs program elevating the voices and visibility of matters most important to the Hispanic Latino community by speaking with community, industry, and industry thought leaders on the social determinants of health and democracy. I am Belen Dumont, writer-editor for the Latino News Network, and your host. Today's LNN Spotlight episode focuses on preparing for retirement and other life transitions later in life. This topic was inspired by a proud partner, AARP New Hampshire, whose mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. AARP New Hampshire State Director, Christina Fitzpatrick, joins us for this conversation in maintaining social connections, a strong sense of purpose, and various aspects of caregiving. Christina, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Belen.
It's always a pleasure to have you. I'm excited to continue our conversation that we have started in a few other episodes in this series. There are a wide variety of factors that influence a person's longevity, and there are many aspects, such as caring for physical health and social needs, that impact the quality of our lives as we age. Although we are going to mainly focus on the topic of life transitions today, Christina, if you can just briefly share on a few other domains on longevity preparedness, please.
Sure. So AARP has a lot of resources around preparing for retirement and preparing for a long life. The MIT Age Lab has partnered with John Hancock to create a longevity preparedness index. And they have a website, and you can go and answer some questions and get a sense of how prepared are you for a long life. And they have a great framework. They've identified 8 domains of what you need to be thinking about as you think about transitioning to retirement and this third chapter of life. So most people, when they think about retirement, they think about health and financial security. So they want to do what they can to get the health care they need and to maintain their health. And then they also, of course, focus on the financial aspects. Have they saved enough? What will their sources of income be? And what does that mean for their quality of life? But there are a lot of other aspects that we all need to think about. So, for example, most people want to age at home or in the community, but to do so, you need to make sure that your home is set up for that. So, for example, my house, you have to climb a whole flight of stairs to get up to the first level. And that is a detriment. So my husband and I aren't going to be able to age in that house. We're going to have to move at some point. So thinking about what you can do to make your home more accessible is one aspect of this planning. Another is how are you going to prepare for life transition? So thinking about, what if your spouse dies? Like my parents have talked about how they each have activities that they do on their own so that when one of them dies, they're not losing everything. They're still going to have some social connections. And then there are aspects of the community that we can all focus on. What can we do to make sure that the communities are set up to support an aging population?
I was hoping to first then focus on the transition to retirement, how there can be mixed emotions and thoughts on retiring. My mom has been working her entire life. It's a lot of her life, takes so much of her time, and she's considering retiring soon. And she's partially retired, but it's hard. So I was wondering what people should consider when thinking about retiring and what they should keep in mind when making this decision. Also, what factors they might be exploring within themselves, but then discussing with their friends and family.
Yeah, it's important to recognize what a large chunk of our lives are spent in the workplace. So if, for people who are working full time, they're looking ahead to retirement. And if you go from working every day to not going into the office, that's a huge, huge transition. People they see people at the office or, wherever they're working. So there's that social connection, you're chatting with people and just being around people makes a difference. And then there's the question of how you're using your time. And there's the what are you doing every day? If you're not going to the office, how are you structuring your time so that you have a sense of purpose and you're not sort of defaulting to sitting on the couch and watching the TV. And you have to be deliberate about that. You have to think ahead so that and build these things over time so that maybe there's a kind of an off ramp from working all the time to not working all the time. And maybe part of that is you find a way to stay working part time that you if you enjoy it and you get something from it, that's good. So AARP has a lot of volunteers, and there's one of them who had a full career, and now in retirement, he works a few shifts a week at Market Basket at the grocery store as a bagger because he just likes being around people. He likes chatting, and that's a way to kind of get that fix of being around different people.
Definitely, and that sense of structure, right? Like having to be somewhere on time, like that really motivates you to get out of the house.
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it. And one of the things that's really important that kind of underlies what we've been talking about is that loneliness is a huge um, it's a huge issue, especially for people as they age and if they're living alone for whatever reason, whether they were married and their spouse died or just they're aging alone. They need to think about it because it's bad to feel lonely. That's just very depressing, so it can have an effect on your mental health. It can also have an effect on your physical health because if you're feeling depressed, it's harder to motivate yourself to get out there and do things. So we know that 40% of older adults feel lonely. So that's not good. But what's even worse is 20% of older adults are socially isolated, meaning they don't have regular contact with other people. And that's really detrimental to their health. So it increases their mortality and their chance of dying early, the same amount that smoking 15 cigarettes a day has on on your physical health. So it's so important for people to prepare to figure out that so that they don't become socially isolated and don't have those physical effects from that. And the other thing about being socially isolated is that it increases your chance of becoming victimized by scams and losing money to scams. So it's important for all of us to recognize that social isolation is a big problem in society, and there are things that public policy can do. There are things that all of us can do to address that. And as individuals, it's important as you're preparing for retirement to foster relationships outside of the workplace so that when you retire, you don't lose your whole social network. You want to foster relationships outside of your immediate family to get that support for when challenges come up. One thing that I was amazed by, I was talking to somebody who her whole family, they all live well into their 90s. And she said that her grandmother encouraged her to make friends who were younger than she was. Because you hear about that, like people as they age, their friends die, their brothers and sisters die, and cousins, and it's very sad. But then also, if that means you're losing your social network, you're at risk of becoming socially isolated. And then the final thing that we recommend is finding activities outside of the home. That can be a wide variety of things. But again, it's something that you have to plan for.
Right, something that you can start off the bat, whether it's finding someone, a friend or family that shares that interest and then exploring it more, or right, just trying new things. Thank
Mhm.
you for emphasizing the importance of just having that social connectedness and how that affects you in so many different areas. I think it's really easy to underestimate that. And it's also something that can happen slowly, right? Like you slowly can lose your circle. And as you were saying, it takes a lot of intention to be reaching out, to meeting new people. And if you're not going to work or you're not going to school, it can be harder to actually make those new connections.
Yeah.
Um, So that's something that would be nice to also explore in a future conversation. Yeah, that my mom is a CNA. She's been working in like nursing homes, assisted livings for
Mhm.
20 years, and she constantly is telling me the importance of having like those social connections. And she develops relationships. She's fortunate that she gets along with all her patients.
Mhm.
She's also really good at her job,
Mhm.
but she develops genuine relationships with them. And she told me that when she retires, she'll be visiting. Um,
Yeah,
after because that really does make a difference.
right, right, to her and to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it fulfills her so much to be working. And so after that, right, still visiting and maintaining that connection will be great for
Mhm.
everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
For, you know, conversation, moving on into the avenue of caregiving. I was wondering, when is it a good time for people to start having that conversation with their loved ones? I already kind of started that topic, and how, you can start this discussion that can be quite sensitive in a gently way, and also talking about the different types of caregiving.
Yeah. So former First Lady Rosalind Carter has, she said something that we refer to a lot. So she said there were only four kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need care. And I think that A, it's true, and B, that provides the opportunity for an in for having conversations with people in your life. Because if that say your parents and you need to have conversations with them, or you feel like it's important to have conversations with them about what's coming, more than likely they have been a caregiver in their past lives, that they cared for older relatives. And so they know what it's like when it's time for somebody to stop driving because it's no longer safe for them to be on the road. That's a really hard conversation to have. Because if somebody has to stop driving, they're giving up a lot of independence because they were going to have to rely on other people or other services to get where they need to go. So that's a very, very difficult conversation. But if we all recognize that there does come a point when someone is unsafe to drive, then we can have a conversation about what are some of the signals that it's time to that it's not safe to drive anymore. And one thing that AARP has is a presentation we do, but there's also resources, and we call it "We Need to Talk." And part of that is some criteria that people can do a self-assessment about whether they're still safe behind the wheel. So if we can have those conversations, and when we're in midlife, think about looking ahead, what we've seen in our caregiving roles, and being honest with ourselves about what are some signs that it's time to give up the keys? What are some signs that it's time to bring help into the home or to find some other way of getting the help we need to live well independently? Then, when we get to be older and it's time for our kids to be having these conversations with us, we can all look back at what did we discuss earlier? What about these? We've agreed that these are some signs, and we're seeing those signs now. So let's talk about what comes next. And if you can have those conversations and think about what are options going to be. So when my parents are no longer able to drive, for example, they live in a suburban neighborhood, there's it's going to be hard for them. And so they need to start thinking like when we can't drive anymore, would that be time for us to sell our house and move to a retirement community where there are more options? So sometimes a retirement community, they'll have a shuttle that goes to the grocery store, or goes to Target, or goes to the movie theater, things like that, so that there's a kind of a built-in way for you to get where you need to go. Um, so those are if we ourselves are thinking about that, then that makes it a lot easier for the people who are going to be caring for us.
And that's great to have those conversations with them, like you said, talking about very specific signs or I guess expectations and boundaries, like a collaborative conversation together.
Mhm. Right. And that's something, we need to think about for ourselves and be committed to. And I feel like it just is a lot easier to make commitments for your future self than it is to be in the moment and having um, uh, just if you get to be at a point where you need help, it can be really hard to acknowledge that to yourself or to anyone else.
Mhm.
And so to commit to having those conversations before you need the help, you're thinking about it in a more kind of dispassionate way and can be better prepared.
Right. You can think through your options more and brainstorm what are the different, compromises or I guess, right, avenues to do afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah, you're in a better brain space for doing that brainstorming and thinking about options.
Within that, I was also wondering, when talking about the different types of caregiving, specifically family caregiving, in many Hispanic cultures and how my family's practiced it, it's kind of assumed, that your family will care for you. But I think as you're saying, like it's starting to change now where, our parents are thinking about their own experiences and the capacity that they had to care for their loved ones, and how it can be a full-time practice, right? There's just so much that goes into it, whether we've talked about this before, preparing your home for it, adjusting your own work schedule for it. Sometimes you need a whole team, not just one person could do it themselves. And so I'm wondering, if you can talk a little bit about, I guess, considering that how that can alter people's relationships or just like what factors go into it, specifically when it comes to thinking about being a family caregiver.
Yeah, yeah. So there are 60 million family caregivers in this country, people who are currently providing ongoing care to an adult relative who has some sort of health condition. And that can range from buying groceries and helping people get to the doctors and things like that, all the way to actual medical care, actual medical tasks that people need to perform at home without any kind of nursing help, things like that. So it's extensive. On average, they're spending 27 hours per week on that care. And if you add it all up, you think about what's the value of those hours of care? Like if you had to buy that care, it's $1 trillion a year that family caregivers are contributing to the system and making it so that taxpayers aren't paying and people themselves aren't having to pay for care that they really can't afford. So there's a lot that rides on the shoulders of family caregivers, and it's a really challenging thing. Like even if you really believe that this is what you want to do, like you want to prepare, you want to give this care to your loved ones, it can take a financial toll, a toll on your mental health and your physical health. So it's important for caregivers to recognize that and get help and support for themselves. So while they're providing help, they're also receiving some care, and that can be really hard to take the time to do that. But again, it's a conversation we can have ahead of time that we recognize that and value that. Because I feel so my mom is Cuban, and so I grew up around her friends and things. And I mean, maybe this is true and for other cultures too, but I didn't see it as much on my dad's side. There was a lot of tisking. There was a lot of just like, oh, how could you do that? Your madrina or whatever is talking about like how you're treating your parents and that's not right or whatever. Um, and so we want to avoid that. We want to avoid making our kids feel guilty about the choices that they have to make because those choices are never easy. Um, Yeah, so I think there's a lot to be said for having conversations ahead of time to make the caregiving a little easier. But regardless of how many conversations you have, it is always hard when you get older and start experiencing some kind of limitations. It's really hard to admit to yourself that you are at that place. Um, and when you are needing more help, that parent-child relationship is changing.
Mhm.
Because when your health is good and you don't have those limitations, then you're the older generation. You have capabilities, you have the wisdom, you have the family knowledge. And when you start to need help, that dynamic changes, and it's hard to give up being the one who's hosting the family dinners or the holidays and things like that, and sort of giving that over to the next generation. So it's important for the younger generation to be sensitive to that and to really acknowledge how hard it is for people to accept that their abilities are changing and therefore their role in the family and society and everywhere else is changing.
Absolutely right. As we're talking about the importance of having these conversations earlier on, for individuals that are aging to like, come to terms with, what's going to be happening or changing. It's also the younger generation that has to also change their perspective and be prepared,
Mhm.
and how that dynamic and the responsibilities are changing. So thank you for that. Yeah, I resonate with a lot of them.
Yeah.
And going on to resources, because I think we can just continue this
Hmm.
conversation. We've talked about, the resources specifically related to caregiving that AARP has before, such an extensive library of things. I was wondering if you could share about the specific type of resources that organization offers, but then also any other related local resources.
Yeah. So AARP has a website called aarp.org/caregiving. And that just has a wealth of information on it. We have some new features that make it easier to find what you're looking for. And we've talked about some of the resources that caregivers need, and AARP has a lot of them. So, for example, we talked about self-care and how important it is for the caregivers to get the help they need to maintain their sense of identity, their mental health, their physical health. And we have a lot of self-care guides that give people ideas of how to get the support they need. And one of the biggest ones there is to have a break from those caregiving duties and go take care of yourself. Like, go to your own doctor's appointments, have some time for exercise, have some time to just sit down and read or whatever else recharges your batteries. There are things as your relatives are getting older and maybe they are starting to become lonely, to have fewer contacts with people. There are some guides and articles and things for how to how to give your loved ones some ideas for how to socialize more, be around people more, pursue their interests. So to remain engaged in the community and with other people. There's also guides around fraud prevention, like how can you talk to your loved ones and give them the tools they need to stay safe. There are practical tips about how to find the right kinds of caregiving help. So, what kinds of questions to ask home care agencies and the individuals who will be coming into the home, how to find the right nursing home. There are support groups for caregivers online. And we also have very practical guides for at some point, you're going to need to take over your loved one's finances, of paying the bills and making sure that you have the power of attorney and things like that to be able to manage your loved one's finances, making sure that all the legal documents are in place, how to find resources in your community. We have state resource guides for every state. And then there are just kind of practical guides around like what if your loved one has diabetes? What if they have dementia? What are the specific things you need to know about caregiving in those situations? And then finally, we've talked a lot about social isolation and how to recognize that and try to prevent it. And AARP has a great webpage. It's called Connect to Effect. So connect the number two and then effect with an A, connecttoeffect.org. And it talks about social isolation and there's an assessment so you can see where you might be able to help yourself connect with people more. And there are guides giving you some pointers for easy ways to get out and see people. Because once you are socially isolated, what if your, friends have died or they've moved away to be near their grandkids or whatever, it can be hard to put yourself out there to meet new people and make friends. But you can start in easy ways, like you can go to your library once a week, and then the librarians are recognizing you and saying hello. You can find a community garden and go there. And if you are regularly getting out into the community that way, you recognize people, they recognize you. And that sense of being somewhere where you matter, or somebody's going to notice if you don't come in a while, that can be a very powerful um, feeling of connectedness and belonging. That's just really important.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
That reminds me when I was a barista, we would have some people that were retired and come in regularly, and we'd be like, "Oh, where were you last week? Or where have you
Yeah.
been? Oh, on
Mhm.
vacation." Right? I
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
it.
Exactly. Yeah. Provides opening for conversations. That it can be hard to strike up a conversation with a stranger, but if you have established that familiarity, it becomes a little bit easier.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that umbrella of resources from broad to specific.
Mhm.
It's very helpful. And then we'll keep amplifying that, and I will be going over that myself and sharing that with my loved ones.
So there are two things I would like people to take away. One is this idea that preparing for retirement is multifaceted. While most of us think a lot about our income in retirement and how to make sure that that's adequate, there's so many other things that we need to consider to make that transition to retirement as good as it can possibly be. So one of the main things that I want people to realize is to think about how you're going to maintain social connections when you retire. So the transition from work to retirement can be challenging for that reason, that the connecting with others, being around other people isn't going to be automatic anymore. So how are you going to make sure that you are connecting with other people? How are you going to structure your days so that you maintain that sense of purpose? And how are you going to get out of the house and have activities that that help you structure your days and help you be in touch with other people?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, it's great to emphasize all the different domains. I started my retirement savings account recently, but
Good for
exactly,
you.
which is a good start, right? But there are so many other factors, as you were talking about, to just consider and keep in mind. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, yeah, the power of compound interest. The sooner you start saving retirement, the more your money can do for you and it can build over time.
Yes, that's what I've been told. I'm starting on it, yeah. Um, so, Director Christina Fitzpatrick, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Belen. It's great to talk to you.